Welcome to Keep It Together. We're an online talk show that offers businesses, leaders, and entrepreneurs expert panel and advice on how to keep it together during COVID-19. Episode 3 is very much about grief. Why do we feel grief? The speed of the COVID-19 lockdown and unpredictability of the situation has created a rollercoaster of emotions, including grief. Grief for how your businesses were doing beforehand, how maybe your teams were humming, or maybe even how a project that was about to happen, or even a social connection that you have in the workplace isn't there any longer, all due to COVID-19. Organisations need to talk to their teams about their feelings and ask directly, how is your mindset and your mind space today? And how can leaders be prepared and supportive for the myriad of responses they're going to be facing? Welcome back, Anton, my favourite psychologist.
Well, thank you, Lena. Very nice to be here again.
I'm very lucky to have you hold my hand and my brain during this process. This unusual situation, and today's episode we are going to be talking about grief, why I feel grief, and in the context of work. And I think just, for everyone, this might be something that an emotion they may not realize they're feeling. And the reason I think it's grief is because, it happens so fast, the impact of COVID-19 on businesses. Whether it's a corporate or a SME or an entrepreneur, it happened so fast. We, had very little time to realise what was going on, just like a sudden death. Then we went into lockdown and had to find a whole way of working. And for many of us, our businesses took a dive. And then out of that is uncertain times, and we don't have any certainty of. It's not like a diagnosis of something, and you go, okay, this is what it is, and it's going to be this, and this is how you're going to feel, and then and then you just get on with a plan. The only plan you have now is uncertainty. So tell me a little bit about this grief. I mean, I almost feel guilty about feeling grief as well, and so, but is it a natural thing regarding in a work environment to be feeling this?
It's completely normal and completely natural. Our brains are hardwired for familiarity and safety. So when that familiarity and safety disappears, we've suddenly lost something that we rely on very heavily. So it is literally like someone dying. If you have lost, and that is the word, if you've lost the life that you had, and many of us have, because life now will be different for a long time to come, that is a massive gap in our head, and we are experiencing a sense of, initially, what's really interesting is if you think about it, someone's dying, what's the first thing that people do? Their first reaction is one of almost numbness or denial, or not quite feeling it. And what you will often see people do is they'll get into totally practical mode. They'll sort out the funeral. They'll keep themselves busy. And so in that moment, they are in the denial phase. And if you think about what we're doing in terms of the early transition into all of this working from home and the new policies and procedures and how you're taking care of your staff, everyone is feeling, although it's different, they're still feeling productive and almost in control. And
so that would have been week 1.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And what you see again in a grief reaction, so imagine that the funeral is finished. It's like, well, okay, the practicalities have gone, but my life as was is now no longer possible. How do I feel about that? How do I want to feel about that? And the next stage, depending on who and how you are, it can be either anger or it can be sadness. There is a sense of sadness for feeling I won't ever be in that place where I was before. Things have changed, and when you start to recognize that things have changed for the long term, it really hits you in a very, very different way from when you think she'll be right after 3 or 4 weeks.
Now tell me about that. So you say you grieve a feeling of loss. it healthy just to have shed a little tear or two about how thriving my business was before? I don't know. I'm not saying I've done it. No, actually,
I know a friend.
I know a friend, and many people have been in this position all over the world with their businesses, and it's not just if you run your own business. You might have a project that was about to kick off, something that lots of teams had been working on, and it's all come to a halt.
Yeah.
And teams, just the recognition of what they've done and the efforts they've done will never be seen or never be heard, or that must be awful for leaders to manage that. And I mean, is it okay to have a couple of tears?
It's not only okay, it's healthy.
Mm.
Because what you're doing is you're being true to yourself. You're being honest with that feeling of sadness. It's when people resist that feeling of sadness that what sits underneath is not resolved. It's not worked through. If you're constantly doing just to avoid the pain of what was, again, you'll never stop. You'll never stay still. You'll never be an integrated version of yourself. To grieve for something that was part of your life and is now no longer part of your life. If you look at, again, linking it into funerals, if you look at other cultures, for example, they have 4 or 5 days where they call it the wailing. You have those days where you are totally given permission to give in to your emotional state and just experience it, but experience it without shame or guilt, because that's what we feel. And it's incredibly cathartic. It's very, very helpful to be able to hear yourself express that, be able to get it out and get support and have it heard and listened to. And the other thing, if you think about it logically, is that all you're saying is that I care about my job. And how good is it to acknowledge the fact that you care about the work that you did? So yes, to shed a tear is completely normal, completely reasonable, and in fact, it's healthy.
Oh, and and I think I love the way you always, help to see the positive. It's like, you just care, and that's why you're grieving. Mm. So I don't have the luxury to be wailing for 4 days because I'm in lockdown with my children. And my husband, he's an essential worker, so he leaves each day, and I'm wailing on the inside that he gets to go out. And what strategies could I put in place? Because I'm not garden anymore. The kids know something bad happens when I go to the garden.
It's a really good point, because there is a myth associated with what resilient people do. Mm-hmm. And the myth is that resilient people sort of somehow don't ever experience these down moments. But what resilient people do is they do experience those feelings, but what they're able to do in that moment is, I call it realistic positivism. In other words, rather than going, she'll be right, mate, well, we don't know. It's a very uncertain future. That's not helpful, because you're denying the reality of the future. But realistically positive people, and that's what resilient people do, is go, okay, what are my resources realistically? What is it within my circle of control and influence realistically? What can I do right here, right now, whilst I acknowledge this discomfort, to move me forward in a way that I'm still my best self in this present moment? Where do I want to get to in this new reality? So it's that coming to terms with the new reality, including your discomfort and your emotions, that enables you to go, okay, this is how things are. What does that mean for me now?
And I think that's exactly, for some people, if you don't acknowledge that emotion and that grief, then you're not asking those questions and where you need to get to, and then be able to move to where is the next phase. Mm. Now, and part of the grieving process is, I've been fortunate enough not to have to suffer the loss of someone very close to me, but there is this similarity again to the funeral thing of unknown and uncertain times. Yeah. And I wonder whether, and what does that look like for everybody?
It's a great question, because we're now entering into the phase which is probably the most uncomfortable phase for people.
Yeah.
This is the phase where people either shut down because they feel overwhelmed, or it's that going stir crazy. It's where the emotional brain starts to kick in, where a lot of people will get very frustrated or angry. Anger is another stage of grief. It's a natural process. We now go, this isn't right. Things need to be this way. It should be this way. The government should be doing this. Organizations should be doing this. My manager should be doing this. And all we're doing is trying to protect our own emotional fragility because of the unknown.
Wow, Anton, we're going to talk about this in the next episode. I'm calling it re-entry into the workforce, because I do feel like it's an outer space experience and we're having to re-enter.
It literally is. Yeah.
And so, just to wrap up, it's okay to be feeling the grief that I'm feeling for life, for the grief of something that was, okay? Yep. Take the time out to do that in a way that works, given your lockdown bubble situation. Mm-hmm. And because in the way you do it, you're being a realistically positive person. I love that. And then get ready for the next phase, which is, the unknown.
Yes, and the way in which you get ready for that is to identify where are you trying to get to, not in terms of, not a specific end point, but how am I wanting to feel? What sort of values am I wanting to live? Because they probably haven't changed that much. But what your behavior might be is quite different, because you might say, for example, well, family is important to me, but over the next 6 months, I want my family time to be a bigger part of my life than it was before, because things have changed. So it's being able to look at, how do I live my life in accordance with my values in a way that I can influence over a discernible period of time.
And once again, we always end up in the same sweet spot, which is, it's about you as a leader and your values and you being true to yourself.
Yeah.
And if you have to find that, it will, hold you in the right path. If you get off that path, you just need to navigate yourself back to those values again and what's important to you.
Yeah, and it's really refocusing on you and your journey, not what should or could or ought to be happening in the bigger world around you, because you can't have a direct influence over that. That's where we start to feel powerless. And that's where how many of us cover up our sense of powerlessness by moving to anger. It's called righteous anger. We find things to get angry about, because we can be angry at the outside world and then we don't have to look at ourselves so much.
Oh, I'm excited about talking about righteous anger episode. I'm sure some people experience that.
Yeah, many people do.
Oh, lovely talking to you, Anton, and I look forward to our next episode, re-entry into the workplace and righteous anger.
Yeah, see you then.
Thanks, bye.
Okay. Bye.
Welcome back, Jerry Beale. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Back in the bubble.
Back in the bubble. Yes, it's one big bubble. What would happen if we connected all of our bubbles? I'm feeling, for all you guys who haven't actually seen an episode before, Jerry Beale is, in my Kiwi accent, I say Jerry Beale, so I do apologise. The way you say your name is so much better. I'll get you to say it.
Oh, Jerry Beale?
Oh, it sounds like...
It's a very confused Anglo-Irishman living in New Zealand.
Yeah, an Irishman living in New Zealand who describes himself as the Chief Happiness Officer at Tickled Pink. He trains leaders and designs health and wellbeing engagement programs that drive happiness in order to grow businesses through growing their people. And the topic that we are covering today is, why do I feel grief about my role, my job, my business? It's happened so fast, COVID-19 and the impact on businesses. we didn't have time to prepare. We didn't know what was happening. It was so unpredictable. For many of us, our businesses were humming before COVID-19, or some people had projects that they were about to launch, that'd been working, teams that had been working on big projects, and then now it's been taken away from us. And Anton, the psychologist, said, you're grieving for what's gone. And I said to him, I feel very guilty about that. But what happens is, it's a personal thing, and is it okay to feel grief? And is it okay how long do I grieve for? And so from a personal perspective, he said, yeah, absolutely, it's natural and it's healthy, and do it. And then, we have to, then how you cope out of it is important. But what happens as a company, as a culture, like, should companies and people come together and grieve? Because there'll be lots of projects, things that are halted. Your businesses are going to be shrinking sometimes, or they don't even know what it's going to look like. So from a culture, as a culture coach, how should a company grieve? Or should a company grieve? Or do you acknowledge the grief?
I think, as you said, grief is a perfectly natural human emotion, and it's not something you can put away. It's a bit like having perhaps an awkward, embarrassing brother or sister. It's not going to go away. You just got to learn to live with it. And again, I think you've already covered some of this, but we have a little bit of degree on how much we let the grief take over. In an organizational sense, the company culture is a container. I like to call it a vessel of belonging. From the CEO right the way down to the forklift driver to the whatever, we're all in this together. And a culture should be able to extend and accept all of us, regardless of who we are, where we've come from, and what we do. Now, that comes into play now because we're all going to respond to this grief differently. Because we've all got our own internal wiring, our own internal ways of coping with situations, our own embedded patterns and behavior, nobody's going to respond in the same way. And the culture has to be elastic enough, a bit like having a bag full of cats, so that everybody respond in their own personal way, but keep us together, and to retain that support, that cohesiveness, and crucially, the trust. Even if I don't make use, if you like, directly of the trust I feel I have with you, my workmates, just knowing it's there is going to support me. And it's a bit like, again, the idea of talking about something which is causing me pain actually relieves the stress to a degree. It doesn't need to be fixed. So the first thing I'd say is our company culture needs to reflect that we are human beings first and workers and workmates second. And human beings and our response to the situation has to be treated first. And again, there's a lot of good support out there around how we reestablish routines and rhythm. You talked about earlier on around should a company grieve together. Yeah. I was asked at the start of the year, actually, when the Australian bushfires flared up and the sky changed color here. A past client of mine asked me to come back, and they have an employee team of around 50, and actually run some group sessions where people simply could vocalize their feelings around the bushfire in Australia, how weird it felt, their concerns around climate change and everything else. And we ran 3 groups of between 8 and 12 people. And it was actually, for me, it was a complete privilege, because there were senior managers there were rank and file, but everybody after the first 10 minutes arrived emotionally. And everybody, even if they weren't typically renowned for speaking out, actually spoke up and said, what this made me feel is this. And we had incredible honesty. We had, I think, wonderful heartfelt wisdom. We had tears and we had hugs. And it brought the team closer together. And the impacts of that lasted long beyond the bushfire situation. So I think the way that an organization and its culture learns to, if you like, share some aspects of the grief, we can't share it all, will actually create a deeper level of engagement and loyalty to the team and the leaders, not to the, if you like, the masthead of the business, that will outlast COVID-19. Something that I'm working with some people on is having what I call an emotional check-in as part of your regular rhythmic meetings and routines. And that is simply a regular slot within the meeting at the beginning or the end, where people, if they want to, can simply say, hey, what I'm feeling right now is this. And the one rule we have on that is that nobody actually responds or tries to fix it. So if I say, right now, I've got a mortgage to pay. I know that my job might not be secure. I can't sleep at night. I'm feeling awful. All we ask the team to do is to receive that. And the word receive is big. To receive that in honesty and respect and compassion. Now, if somebody feels they have something to offer that might help that person, that should be channeled back through the meeting head or the leader. What we don't want is everybody speaking at once going, I know, you should, because that, one, I think it's inappropriate. I haven't actually asked for help. And two, it tends to be overwhelming and possibly even useless. Just create the forum for people to access the trust our culture creates. Simply say, right now, I'm feeling like this.
And sorry to interrupt, Jerry. Okay. I think the question that you've answered, which has been hanging over my mind, was, should organizations be leading forums for people to be able to grieve? And I love the fact that you do workshops. I actually think, as we're going to actually cover a different episode, and we should bring this up about re-entry into the workplace, because I feel like it's an outer space experience, and we will be re-entry. And this should be a strategy that we should be, that organizations should consider I think we need to have a corridor, and everyone coming together and just talking about the grief that has happened for things that we have lost before, and projects and possibly people as well with redundancies, and and just letting it out, and the skill of just receiving, not solving, and listening is so important. The closest I've seen it, and there may be organisations who may be putting it, is the Air New Zealand newsletters that we've been getting, that been saying this is what we're doing from a structure perspective. This is how it's affecting our people. I get those emails, and I feel like this is an organisation that really, really knows how to connect and take the emotions and the journey of the team and the people, and they even recognise not Air New Zealand people, but services to Air New Zealand and all those, and the impact it has. And I am worried that there are not going to be enough organisations that are going to take this initiative and go, before we even get back into the corporate world or our big teams, we need to acknowledge this grief, and those workshops are a fantastic idea. Are they common? I mean, how can we get them started? I mean, I want to start a movement, a post-COVID-19 grief movement in the workplace.
Well, the answer is they're not common, but we have done different sorts of workshops. There was another large New Zealand company that went through quite a large round of redundancies a year or so ago. And we were asked to come in and run some workshops for the employees who were remaining, because there was grief. The team has gone from 20 to 12. There's 8 empty seats, and there's grief. There is the dislocation from the familiar, which is quite objective. Then there is the far more personal situation that I actually like that person, she's gone. So I feel bad and I'm still here. So yeah, we designed and ran a series of workshops in that organization to help the team that was left, if you like, after the restructure, to learn how to reset themselves and come together and look forward and not get stuck, if you like, in the what ifs and a little bit of anger and frustration and the grief. And the company, I think, was very brave to ask us to do that, because there's always the chance you're going to get taken to pieces by people who are angry at the structure. But as it happened, I think, what they did was done for very sound, essential commercial reasons. But I totally adore the compassion that the leader showed in saying, I want to give people the chance to get it out, get it off your chest, put it in the middle of the room, and let's move on. And for that reason, the leader wasn't in those sessions. There were some senior managers there, but I said at the start, for the next 35 minutes, we were all equal. Your job titles don't matter. You're simply a collection of human beings who are coming back to work within a changed organization and a changed structure. It feels different. You feel different. Now is the chance you've got, if you want to simply say how you're feeling.
And interesting, we talked a little bit about, with Anton, different cultures and how you grieve. And then, see, some people take 5 days and do a wailing process, and I made a joke with him and said, well, I don't have 5 days to wail in my bubble because I've got kids and, and everything else. But if you've got a company culture that has taken the initiative and been brave enough to go, let's have these workshops and talk about what people have gone through. What is the next stage, after grieving and, coming out of it? And how was that managed? Because, sometimes you go into these places and you let it all out and then it goes back to what it was before, and nothing's done with it.
That's a really good point. Because we're all different and we all move through grief in our own stages, regardless of how we appear, for example, in a workshop like that, it would be wrong to assume, okay, all better now, let's get on with things. I think it calls for the good old word trust again and sensitivity. Because people, there's an echo in me around how I'm feeling, and there's an echo in everybody else who was there around how they're feeling. And I mean, and not just around the grief, but I believe businesses need to understand that the world will not go back to the way it was. Quite how significant the changes are is yet to be revealed. But I mean, I am 180% sure that aspects of the relationship between human beings and businesses will change. The relationship I have between, if you like, my drive, my career, and what constitutes my personal life is going to change. So I think a smart leader needs to be very tuned in and connected to gauge where people are at. And again, communicate. Leverage the connection, leverage the communication, use the rhythm as a thread of continuity, but you are leading a bunch of people into a new world. You really are. And quite apart from the grief, the fact that it's so unfamiliar and new will bring up issues as well. There are those who like the idea of change. There are those who shy away from change. And we're strange creatures. We say we like the idea of change, but we actually keep on going back to what we're most familiar with because it's less work and it's less scary, So again, I think this needs to be a very connected process with lots of communication. And as a leader, you've got to have your radar turned on. And we've talked in the past around what if somebody doesn't want to show their feelings? You've got to have the ability, I believe, no, you know what, there's something you're not telling me. Whether you ask them to open up or not, you've got to bear in mind that there is something going on with them. And the other big thing here is, if as a leader, I'm one of those who does not like dealing in emotions, I think you've got a fairly stark choice, particularly with the idea of an emotional check-in and the ability for people to actually share how they're feeling. Either you find somebody internally or externally who can run those sessions in a safe way, or you need to acquire the ability to do that yourself. And that means you need to get very good at being open, empathetic, and vulnerable. It's a big ask.
It is a big ask, but I actually think your point is so valid. And, you know, every expert I have spoken to have all agreed on this separately. You're absolutely kidding yourself if you think you're going to go back to the world that was, and we are going into a new world, and you are leading into a brand new world, which nobody knows what it's going to look like. We've got training wheels on, and I think it's quite important that we all focus very much on, go back to, like you say, deal with psychological pandemic, with your values that are your pillars are made from your culture. And no matter what the challenge is, whether it's, you know, helping your team get through the grief through these workshops, or, you know, what the new would look like, trust, over communicate, over communicate, connectedness, and what am I missing, darling?
Well, again, the pillars I set up at start were trust, rhythm, connection, communication. And again, the culture is the vessel of belonging. It's a living thing that needs nourishing and supporting. And the values that really drive your culture need modeling. And there's one more thing which is really important, particularly, you know, I've talked about if somebody stands out as needing some one-on-one support, whether you have, you know, a workplace safety team, whether you have somebody on staff or a resource, you need to be able to address that and not just hope it goes away, because it won't go away. And there are ways of working with somebody who is obviously needing help and in distress, you know, whether it's a work issue or whether it's a more deeper, their emotional state. To say, firstly, you know, are you open to a private conversation? If they are, how you manage that is really important. And there's a structure I can go into another time around how you run those little meetings. But what's really, really important is, one, I allow them the space to be how they are. You know, I'm not pushing, well, come on, what is it? What is it? What is it? Because some of us are rubbish at getting to the point where we can actually open up and be real. Or we've got to sift through our own thinkings to get to feelings. And if you're going to expect me to be able to open up and share with you, you've got to give me the time to arrive there. And there's another phenomenon, you know, when we're stressed, we often respond by speeding up. You know, everything's got to be faster. People in the car hoot, you know, etc.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
That will not work here. I've got to allow you to work at your pace, and I've got to adapt where I'm at to allow your pace. And if I can do that, I will start to build deeper trust.
And I think on that note is a wonderful note, that takeout, which is, I really love, which is allow people to arrive at where they're at. And with grief, it may come now, it may come later. It might be when people come out of their bubble. But having the culture of trust and being able to communicate with your team and connect with your team to, you know, be there for when they arrive with that particular emotion is really, really important. And thank you so much, Jerry, for highlighting the importance of a very, very, of having a strong culture and foundation. And even if you don't have one, now is the time to be building one. And as a leader, what with your team, what does that look like? So you can come out of this with a strong, a feeling of belonging, I think is really what you're saying, is and part of a very, very, a team that value you and what you deliver to your organization.
I'd like to add one thing, if I may, as well. And that is, as the leader, you've also got to be kind to yourself. You've got to develop some self-compassion. And again, maybe it's part of the Antipodean Kiwi male thing where, I'm bulletproof. I don't have feelings. I don't show my feelings. It's not going to work if you expect somebody to show you their feelings if your feelings aren't accessible as well. So one, it means you've got to be prepared to be open, but also when you leave that session, you've got to take care of yourself. You've got to be kind to yourself. And if you're feeling anxiety, if you're feeling stress, if you're not sleeping, and all the issues we're trying to help the employee team with also apply to the leaders, you've got to get some help as well. Because again, and I said a bit to my clients, you cannot expect to lead others if you can't lead yourself. Doesn't work.
And you know what? All the experts are saying the same thing. Look after yourself so you can look after others.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jerry. I'm really looking forward to our next episode. Talk soon.
Bye.
Bye.